privilege and pleasure to welcome back Reverend Bob Flick. You can call him Reverend Bob, you can call him Bob, he'll answer to either one. He has spoken here before, and I'm glad to have him back. He lives in Friendswood with his wife of 30 years. His wife is coming back from a retreat tomorrow, so he's going to be glad for that. He's lived and served in Galveston and in Friendswood and other places. He's been connected with the Catholic and the Anglican communities. He and his wife are both spiritual directors. He's been in service for religious and spiritual things for about 40 years now. Another 10 years will get past probationary period, but okay. His talk today is going to be on discernment and the change process. Change is inevitable in the lives of all of us. Most of us make decisions for change that are deliberate, well studied, or thought through, especially if we have the opportunity and time to do so. We measure options, consider possibilities. We like to think that we exercise some form of personal control during these times of change. So today he's going to talk about that, and where do we look, who do we consult, and what considerations are made when we want to include considerations of spirit and spirituality in our process, in the change process. Reverend Bob, welcome.
Good morning. It's always fun to come here because I see old friends like Margaret and Sandra, and today Lodi appeared. Where'd she go? At first I didn't recognize her because it's been quite a few years. We worked together at the Gulf Coast Center for many years, and then it came to me. It's like, oh, wow, this is cool. So thank you for the invite. This is my third time here. Most of the times that I came here, I talked about, of course, spirituality. I am an active Episcopal priest, and it was funny. We had clergy conference a couple weeks ago, and I was the chaplain. I'm retired, so I don't have to go to any meetings, which is great. But I was the chaplain for the crowd. There were about 350 Episcopal clergy at the meeting, and active clergy. And the rector, Trinity, here in Galveston, said to me, I see you're going to preach at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. And I said, yeah, Jimmy, because you never invite me. So we'll see where that goes. Actually, in some ways, I'd rather be here. So just don't tell him I said that. So my topic is always around spirituality. And of course, obviously, I come at that with a bent. I'm Christian, of course, and even more bent. I'm a Franciscan and a member of a Franciscan community called the Community of Francis and Clare. And so most of my life, I went to the seminary at the ripe old age of 14, back in the days when people actually did that. A lot has changed since then. And so change is probably a pretty good topic when I look at my own life and my own experience. And I want to frame it. Obviously, there's a lot of change that happens in our lives that we don't feel like we have control over, right? There's a lot of change things that come at us, experiences that come at us, like waking up in the morning and feeling an ache or a pain that you knew you didn't really need for the day. And so your schedule changes or whatever it might be, as trivial as some of those things can be, and as powerful as a huge illness or the kinds of things that can cause us to make changes that we haven't chosen, we haven't in no way have been part of our desire. Desire is a big word for Franciscans and a big word, I think, in our spiritual journey. And so I'll touch on that today too. But the change I want to talk about today, I'm framing in the context of what we would call a discernment. A process wherein we make choices and we make decisions. And most of us, make choices and decisions throughout the day. I remember when my wife worked full time and I worked full time, we'd come home, we're exhausted, and our daughter would have then given the directions for the rest of the evening. Where are we going to eat? What time are we going to bed? We left that in the hands of our daughter because we didn't want to make any decisions anymore. It's like enough. But I'm talking about the kinds of decisions and the change process that never goes away if we're fully alive and human beings and desirous of just as the principles that you stated at the beginning of this service: a search for truth, a search for meaning, a desire to listen carefully, with open minds and with open hearts. And that's the kind of change I want to talk about. We call that discernment. I'm officially retired. I teach at our seminary, basically supervising students who are interested in priesthood. So I do that. I also do a couple other things in the diocese, but the most, I guess the work that I do the most is in spiritual direction. So I see quite a few people weekly for spiritual direction. Some of them are clergy, most of them are lay people. I usually visit with them in downtown Houston at Trinity Church. It's actually in Midtown. And so, change and discernment are always part of the experience when you're in direction. So a direction implies some kind of movement, right? And so most of us who are on a spiritual journey are in a movement that is connected to our spirituality or the principles that we've stated for our lives, or our experience of ourselves simply as a human being. And so I'm talking about a change that is a reflective change, not a reactive change. So often we react in the moment. I'm talking about a change that is deeply reflective and more powerful than that, just not reflecting on the changes that happen in an ordinary day, the decisions we might make for moving forward, but more powerfully in discernment, we talk about that change that involves our spiritual journey. It involves, therefore, self-discovery. It involves, if you have a relationship with a supreme being, it involves that kind of a relationship, right? And so that's the kind of change that I'm going to be addressing much more in the context of what we would call discernment moving forward. And it is the stuff of spiritual direction. It is the stuff, I think it's the stuff of anybody who is alive and has a concern for other people and has a concern for personal growth and personal discovery. And I think, honestly, that as we grow older in age, and I'll be 75, I'm younger than Margaret, I'll be 75 this Thursday, and I just love to say that. And I think the charge to become more spiritual is more imperative for me now than it ever has been. I think it was very important for me in building a career to sort of milk my career for how that fits into forming me and allowing me to move forward in life. But now it's much more deep. There's in terms of the spiritual journey, it really is a call to a deeper understanding of who I am created to be. I believe in a God who created me in God's own image somehow. That's the core principle in my Judeo-Christian expression, that I am created in the image and likeness of God. Well, what does that mean? And I think that's the meat of growing more wise. And it can happen as a factor of growing more old. I think a gift that those of us who are, older have, that is a treasure rather than inflicted upon us. And so if we're on that journey, then we need to enter into a process of discernment. How is it that we do that? How is it that we grow not more in line with what we used to call as a young Catholic boy, the will of God, that exists, as I was taught, and frankly, pretty much in the song that Margaret was going to sing but didn't, that sense of a God that works as a sort of the magician, that controls us somehow and makes us into something and creates all these rules. I remember as a kid, we had, in the little Catholic boy, we had all these rules and regulations and all the, whether it was the 10 Commandments or whatever it was, that told us how we were supposed to be and what we were supposed to do. And, I'm sure there's some validity to that, especially when you're 9 years old, but for us who are adults and hopefully mature, have a desire to mature in the faith, the real rules and regulations are not going to be coming from outside of us. They're not going to be coming from a God who is creating all these, telling us, how to do this and how to do that and who we're supposed to, how we're supposed to act. They're going to be coming from within, right? They're going to be coming from a spirit, a flame. St. Bonaventure would say a spark. And that is the image of and likeness of God that we are to be and to become, right? If we're created in God's own image, then we don't need to become anything out that's different from who we have been created to be and who we have been created to become. And we need to look interiorly for that. We need to be contemplative in our spirit. We need to be in the Chinese temple garden or whatever space affords us that opportunity to discern who we are and who we are to be. And then the changes that are around us are made primarily in that context. I always say the greatest gift that I have to give to the world is to be as Bob Flick as I can be, right? My wife might not agree, but I think that at least in theory, and for me, theologically speaking, that's what we're called to be and become. And so discernment is that process, right, whereby we listen, we are obedient to the will of God. Now, the word obedience gets a bad name too. Certainly, if you read St. Paul, but the real core to what obedience means comes from the Latin. It comes from ob audire, which means to listen, right? So obedience, to be obedient to the will of God, is to listen to the godliness that is within us, right? To listen to that spark of light, that space where we are as genuinely as genuinely us as we can be. And I think the gift of aging and becoming hopefully more wise comes when we enter into that process. What does it mean? It means to be able to sit in that garden at the Chinese temple, or in your backyard, or in your house, or the space where you can be present to yourself, and to contemplate who it is that I am called to be today in this moment. It also means, I believe, in the context of people who are spiritual, that we do that with each other. And that discernment is not just a personal thing. It's not just going to the Chinese temple. Excuse me for keep using that, but it came up this morning. It's a common experience for us. It's not just going there, but it's being there with others, right? And so as people who are desirous of following the will of God, we do that in communion with each other, in community. And we do that by being present at deep levels with each other. And so when I sit with someone in spiritual direction, this week I had someone who's contemplating a change in ministry. And the questions were, about this and all this external stuff. And my question to him or her, my question to them was to look inside. Where in your prayer, where in your in the depth of your being, how does this satisfy you, or does it not? How is it congruent with who you are at those deep spaces of your being? Because honestly, if it isn't, if the community that you're moving into doesn't nurture you in prayer, if the community that you're moving into doesn't nurture you in self-discovery, if the community that you're moving into doesn't nurture you in your deep desire to be able to give to other people, if those things aren't out there, then it's not the right decision, right? And that you're the only one that can make that decision. And those are the kinds of questions that we have to ask ourselves as we move forward, I think, in discernment, which is a much deeper, more profound experience than simply making decisions for change. Like I said, it happens in the context of community. And so intimacy becomes an incredible experience in the context of real discernment. First of all, intimacy for me with my God. And for me, that happens in the context of a spirit that I believe abides in the community and abides in me. An intimacy with, for me, the people around me in my life that I know love me. Because for me, the definition of God isn't, again, some esoteric thing out there. It is love. God is love, as St. John says. And so for me, it's that intimacy happens in the context of who do I know loves me? Who do I love? Who can I trust with the most profound questions of my life, related to me becoming more me, right? More profoundly me, more expressive of who I am called to be and to become. So it happens in that context. And I believe that this discernment happens in the context too of the people that we rub shoulders with all day. Where is our how are we able to be and to become ourselves in the context of the people that we work with, in the context of the people that we live with, in the context of the people that we share a community with on this island? What gives me life? What allows me to be and become the Bob Flick that I am called to be and become? And so the good news of all this is that it's very positive, right? That as we experience change in our lives, there's a lot of it that's out of our control. There are a lot of things that are sort of peripheral. There are a lot of changes that we make that are big mistakes. There are lots of things that that we do in our lives that we probably would have done differently. And that's all real, very real in the human experience. What is more real and what is more profound is the stuff that I'm talking about. How am I growing more congruent with who I am created to be and to become? And do I give that energy, right? Do I give that energy? Do I spotlight that in my daily experiences? Or do I just walk through life, in the context of all the peripheral stuff? And so my word today is really one of delight, because when I look at the faces here, I see, for me, a God who has created all these people in God's own image, and it is my deep desire to then come to know that godliness in you, as I would try to do, hopefully, in anyone else out there. Most of my ministry, as many of you know, has been working with the homeless. My last congregation was all homeless people, 250 on a Sunday morning, 150 a day. Lodi knows for 13 years we worked with people with severe and persistent mental illnesses and all kinds of disease processes, addictive processes. And I love that. Why? Because that's the place where oftentimes people just don't want to go to find the presence of God in another person. You wouldn't first go to a homeless person or a person who's hallucinating right in front of you. And yet, some of my most profound experiences of the presence of God were in people who didn't have facades and egos and didn't have to protect each other. And that's who we are called to be and become, right? I remember an experience, I may have shared it here before, I don't know, of a man who was homeless and used to come to our church almost every day because it was a safe place to sit around. And he would be floridly psychotic in and out, at periods. And one day he was pretty off the scale, and he asked me if he could talk, and I, sure, so I took him to my office. I'm a therapist by trade, and that's where I met Sandra, Dr. Sullivan, and I took him to my office and I sat down and I listened to him for an hour, and it was pure and simple word salad. I couldn't understand a thing that he would. I could understand the words, but there was no pattern, there was no sense to it. And at the end, and the reason I tell this story, at the end, he started crying after about an hour, and I said, what's going on? What are those tears saying, And he said, thank you, Father Bob, for listening. I can't remember the last time someone listened to me as coherently as he could. And I still choke up when I, kind of replay that memory. And that has stuck with me, because I think if there's anything that I say today that makes any sense or you could move forward with, is that word listen, which is audire. To be obedient to the will of God is to listen for the presence of the holy in other people. And it doesn't have to make a whole lot of sense. Oftentimes it's just a simple and real and loving presence that we can have with each other. And so again, that nurturing each other from your own principles here at this community, that nurturing each other happens in the context of careful listening. A listening that is of with an open mind and with an open heart, so that minds and hearts can touch each other in ways that oftentimes we cannot cognitively articulate. And so discernment is that. It is that change that we are constantly called into, that provides us with that opportunity for growth And that growth, even as our bodies may be deteriorating, that growth is the stuff of life, and it is the stuff of love. And to become more deeply alive, and to become more deeply spiritual, and to become more deeply loving, the way to do that is not to look around and see how everybody else does it, but to discern in a way that is programmed into our life, to discern how it is and who it is that we are being called into to be and to become in this moment, in this day of our life, in this perhaps era of our life. Who is it? How is it that I can be as me, as Bob Flick, as I can be, or as Lodi, or as Sandra, or as a Margaret, as you can be? That is the greatest gift that you have to give. And unless we highlight that process in our life, we're dancing through life and missing, I believe, the core of who it is, of how it is that we can be in relationship to each other and show love to the world around us. I think that's all I have to say. Most of my stuff comes from St. Bonaventure, actually, who was a follower of St. Francis. He was a medieval theologian from the University of Paris in the late 12 and 1300s. My favorite theologian, and has helped to guide my spiritual journey, and I hope given me some insight to being able to sit with other people in spiritual direction, and to allow them to engage in that process of self-discovery, which is one and the same as a process of God discovery or humanity discovery, because all that is, I believe, that is created by God is good. If I were preaching, I'd say amen.